Maybe not what you said. One of them things. Yeah, we did. We did indeed.
He graduated in like late 19. What did you do? He's
going the other way.
I have so much power.
Todo, miedo, abajo y balas. who just says, I'm a very chilled out guy, so my performance will be very relaxed. Another way you could describe it would also be known as sensory friendly or autism friendly performances. They kind of abandon what you might think are traditional rules in theatre. So audiences would be told, you're in a safe space here. There's no restrictions on your behaviour. If you need to move around, that's fine. If you feel the need to make noise, that's fine. If you are finding the space itself, feeling anxious in the space and want to leave and come back, again, that is also okay.
When we list relaxed performances at the Fringe, we will ask the company that has said they're doing a relaxed performance lots of questions about that performance, and that's absolutely not about spoiling the anticipation for an audience member. A lot of the time, autistic people want to know what's coming so they can be prepared for it, and also so they know if they can actually be in the space for it. So if on Ed Fringe, where you tell us you're doing a relaxed performance, you will see a lot of extra questions that appear, and that's really so that we can list as many potential triggers. Those might be positive or negative for someone, but we want to be able to list as many potential triggers as we can, whether that's about loud noises or flashing lights or audience interaction. All of those things might make someone with autism really excited to be in the room or definitely not want to be there, and they deserve as much as anyone else to make that choice before they buy their ticket.
And for anyone who maybe is listening and hasn't registered a show before, Ed Fringeware that Lindsay mentioned there is the system that we use to register our shows. It's where we collate all the information about the shows, and it's where we ask the questions of the artists. Where we find out what your show is doing, what information we can glean from what you're doing, and I think we've added a lot of new questions this year in terms of accessibility, and where I think they're really great as someone who's much less of an expert than you, Lindsay, on access, is actually the very act of reading those questions made me think, oh, I need to consider it. It kind of nudges you to think of things that you've maybe not thought of before.
That was our plan.
Because to use my favourite Fringecast motto, you don't know what you don't know, so you need to start questioning those things.
So what's another kind of adaptation you can make?
So you can have an audio described performance. That's when I think Ray's going to answer this because my mind's gone blank again.
So this would provide additional narration. It's normally live rather than an audio track. So this would be what's happening on the stage during natural pauses in the audio or dialogue, and you would describe body language, expressions, movements, lighting effects, and it can be very beneficial for blind and visually impaired audience members, and also those with learning difficulties.
And it can be done in a couple of ways. You can either work with an audio describer who would sit in a different room to where the performance is taking place, and they would use a transmitter, and the audience member has the receiver. They have a headset, and it's very much a one-to-one thing that only the people that have the headsets can hear the audio description. That's one way to do it. Another way would be to integrate it into your performance. So there was a show a couple of years ago where it was a one-woman show. She wrote the show herself, and she wrote an audio described version of the show. So she just had a version of the show that she did where she described anything that was key to the action that you had to be able to see. So there's a couple of different ways to do it.
And I guess this is a point that will probably come up in various of the adaptations that adaptions that we're going to talk about. But it's that idea that you raised there of integration versus just pure translation, I guess.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting way to approach all these different adaptions where you can involve the adaptation in
it's part of it, like it's part of the action, it's part of the dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's one way to think of it is that you're finding a creative opportunity here for your show that you may have not thought of before.
So rather than kind of slapping your interpretation on top of the show, you're using it to drive the creation of it.
Nice. Is that everyone covered for audio description?
It's probably worth pointing out that although we're talking about accessible performances here, there is more detailed information on line, and I believe Daniel will put up the address for that if anybody wants to learn more about how to make their shows accessible.
Yeah, we're definitely kind of giving you the headlines here.
You can tell these guys are new to Fringecast because they politely ask you, Daniel, who is in the last session. Katie and I were like, and Daniel have that just ready to go.
And I have.
I feel like that's not the only way you can tell that we're new to Fringecast.
So we've got lax performances, audio description, signed performances.
So signed performances is quite a broad umbrella term. When we use it at the Fringe, we use it to cover a variety of different sorts of performances. It might be a performance that provides British Sign Language or BSL interpretation in quite a traditional manner where the interpreter stands on the side of the stage. It might be a performance which involves a BSL performer, a BSL actor, or a deaf person providing BSL interpretation in the action. So that's much more of an integrated way of doing it. It might be that you have someone providing sign-supported English, which is a bit different to British Sign Language. So there's kind of a variety of different things that we cover when we talk about sign performance. And it can be done in a variety of ways, which I've almost covered here, so I'll just recap it. Someone on the side of the stage or someone as part of your production. And the person in the production, they might be a character of their own. There was a show last year at the Fringe called My Left Right Foot, where I think the first person cast almost was the actor who uses BSL, and they built the show around that character.
I wondered how long it would be before we mentioned that show. It does feel odd for us to be mentioning one show or the other because it's kind of against what we normally do. But when it comes to access, actually, good practice. We need to talk about it.
And it's a great example both of signed performance and audio description being embedded as a central part of the show. It wasn't something they did for only some performances. It was core to the plot and the staging of it.
Absolutely. And so Lindsay mentioned My Left Right Foot, which had a hearing performer performing BSL. There was another show last year called Sirens, which cast a deaf actor as the main character. The other actors then learnt a little bit of BSL, and that was also creatively embedded within the performance. And they also had audio description via a narrator and captioning
And then there's other shows that would the BSL interpreter would be on stage. They might be in costume, so that there's not kind of a visual dissonance, but they're not a character in their own right. They're still providing the BSL interpretation. But by having the interpreter on stage, you're avoiding that kind of ping pong effect of the deaf people having to look from the BSL interpreter onto the stage and back again.
A worry that sometimes we've heard is from performers thinking if they had a BSL performer that close to them, then it's going to maybe distract them. But then we've had a lot of feedback, especially from audience members, who say that actually it's less distracting having the BSL performer or interpreter as close to the performance space as possible. An analogy I was given was it's like watching a puppet show, that you very quickly forget that the puppeteer is even there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really how you use an interpreter, or indeed any of the adaptations we're talking about, really depends on your show, and you'll know best what works best for your show.
And that's why it's a case of thinking about it as soon as possible. I mean, it's March now. August is, I mean, it will be here very quickly, but you're thinking about it now. So you're in a good position to think about ways you could seamlessly embed that into your work.
I would also say as well, like, Lindsay and Ray are both like very clued up and sound like they know exactly what they're doing. But I know for a fact that they know that because you guys went out and spoke to deaf audiences.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to do for any adaptation. So we spent the last few months talking to lots of different deaf people who've been involved in the Fringe as performers, as arts professionals, and as audiences to find out what was it that they wanted. And if you're thinking about bringing a show that has BSL in it, or that is you're adapting for a specific audience, I can't stress enough how important it is to go and talk to that audience in your town and find out what it is that they recommend, what it is they like, what they obviously. Not all deaf people like the same thing. Not all people like the same thing. But trying to get an idea from people what it is that they're looking for is very helpful.
Is it a case of just researching and looking out for an individual community group, or are there actually umbrella organisations you can turn to learn more and get connected?
Both, definitely. And Kate, I think it's definitely looking for local community organisations, because there's nothing as good as just talking to someone face to face about how to make an adaptation. But there's also different umbrella organisations you can talk to. So people we would recommend looking at their websites of. would be Birds of Paradise, who we've talked about already.
Who made My Left Right Foot?
Absolutely.
There's,
They're a disabled-led theatre company in Scotland. There's Grey Eye, who are a disabled-led theatre company in England. Both of them doing amazing work, have lots of resources online.
There's Solar Bear, who are based in Glasgow, and they're a deaf theatre company. And there's also Unlimited, who are based in London, who support deaf and disabled artists. But it's also worth looking on just websites such as like RNIB.
Yep.
They've got information for things like this. And then going on Facebook and like searching for deaf hubs, for instance, because there's a lot of them out there, and that's a way you can directly engage with your audience.
We were recommended, in fact, to find sign pubs, which is just like a night in a pub where loads of deaf people go. And we haven't done it yet, but I think it'd be a really good way to find out more about what deaf people want from the Fringe.
I hope I've caught up with everything that Ray was saying. I've shared links to the 4 different theatre organisations you mentioned. Did you also say RNIB?
I mentioned RNIB, yeah.
Anyone else? Just so I make
Action on Hearing Loss.
Okay.
And also, organisations like the RNIB and Action on Hearing Loss definitely are very open if you get in touch with them as well, and can point you towards people that would be happy to talk to you.
So we talked about giving the headlines here. Is there an email address that's good to contact us?
Yeah, if
I
you're-
say us.
if you
Very
con-
much you guys.
If you contact equalities@edfringe.com, one of us will get back to you with whatever you need.
Just to
Hopefully.
audio describe what happened there,
Hopefully.
Lindsay very much pointed at Ray.
I do look at those emails as well.
So we got one more
I feel like
adaptation,
we've been building up,
which is
to
kind of
Claire
the
herself.
elephant on the screen, which is captioning, which we are doing right now. I say we, Claire is doing
Claire
right
is
now.
doing the brunt of the hard work there. Does someone want to tell us what a caption performance is?
Yes, so a caption performance is when you see text on a screen of all the noises that you hear in a performance that are relevant to the story. So what you're seeing on the screen right now from Claire is an example of live captioning, which is quite exciting. When she captions, she's got no script, in case you couldn't tell, and is...
And we go rogue quite a lot.
And this kind of captioning is really great for things like stand-up comedy, for improv, for anything where there isn't a script. Another example of captioning is unlive captioning, which would often be provided by a person who's been trained by an organisation called Stage Text. And that's when a captioner will take your script. It's used for scripted shows, for musicals and plays, and the captioner will take your script, they'll format it in a very particular way, and then it will be output onto a screen. At the Fringe, it might look a bit different. In theatres around the country, if you go to a caption performance, you'll see a big screen on the side of the stage, which has got a couple of lines of text, and it's usually yellow text on black. At the Fringe, because it's the Fringe and things are a bit different, sometimes it'll be on a mobile phone, sometimes it'll be on a tablet, it might just be an LCD screen. But kind of the technology behind it is that same stage text technology. And then kind of a third option is the more DIY option, which Ray knows more about than I do.
Yeah, so I first heard about this last year when I was speaking to a member of a theatre company who started to go DIY, and for a one-off expense, they were able to now caption every performance they ever do. They did this by just spending around 120 quid on a projection screen. And then for every performance, what they do now is they take a little bit of time, they use PowerPoint to put 2 or 3 lines of script into each slide, scroll through the script as is necessary. They get a member of the theatre company to do that. It's not a captioner, so there's no expense there either. The main expense for this is time.
Yeah. So if I guess it's weighing up what are you able to spend more of? Are you able to spend the time to do that, and also the time to make sure that the output works in terms of what people are saying and that it's a good experience for your audience? Or are you able to find some money to put towards working with a captioner, a trained captioner?
Speaking of the magic word there.
Well, I was just going to say the importance of captioning to people with visual not visual impairments,
Hearing.
Thank you very much. Is really invaluable and best proven by the fact that the people in the room do not know. But for the first 10 minutes of this session, you couldn't hear us, but there was captioning. So while
I wondered why you left the room.
while I left the room, we could pretend it was intentional, but the sound desk just turned off because it was just so wowed by the moment. But the captioning means that you were hopefully able to follow our introduction at the very least.
I feel like that deserves another massive thank you to Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
Because you would not have been able to follow what we were saying. So they are the 4 main adaptations that we're covering today. I've shared links in the live chat about more information about all of these, and indeed the organisations that Lindsay and Ray had referenced. So shall we move on?
I was going to quickly, we had a question in,
Yeah.
which kind of covers all of this and helps us move on to the next section, I guess, as well. And it's around that cost aspect. So I've heard all about these ways to adapt my show. I'm really excited by them all. How's that going to affect my budget? How do I make this a reality?
So the cost of how it's going to, what kind of cost you're looking at to make your show accessible really depends on what your show is and what you want to do.
Classic
Can't-
Fringe cast answer. It's like you've been
can't-
doing it forever, Lindsay.
We can't give you a cut and dried answer to that. Kind of as a rough guide, you might think about 10% of your overall budget, but we would really recommend getting it into your budget as early as possible so it doesn't become an add-on that you're trying to fundraise for, but it's one of your core costs. In terms of help we can give you, we are working with the Federation of Scottish Theatre and are able to lend 3 venues captioning equipment this year. And that information will be going out to venues very soon. So if you're interested in using captioning, please make sure your venue is on the lookout for that information and knows that you're interested in it. And that equipment comes with some money from us to help pay towards the cost of captioners. And we're also working with an organisation called the Audio Description Association Scotland, who do what they say on the tin. And we are borrowing from them some audio description equipment. And again, that will be going to venues along with some money to help pay for audio describers. So again, if you're interested in that, make sure your venue knows you're interested so that when we get in touch with them to offer out the equipment, it really just goes out on a first come, first served basis to venues that are engaging with us on our Venue Access Award. If your venue knows that you want to do these things, they will hopefully be on the lookout for information from us. It's good just to chat to your venue in general, though. Some venues are really interested in making shows accessible and have their own programs in place. So, for example, the Pleasance last year had, in fact, the last couple of years has had quite a big push on captioning, which Claire, our friend who is captioning away for us right now, has been involved in. So definitely talk to your venue if you want to provide something.
If this is your first or your fifth or a number of Fringe casts you've tuned into, that advice of just keeping your venue in contact and letting them know what you want and what you're trying to achieve is one of the most important pieces of advice we can ever give.
Like, literally, I would say the first time I did a Fringe show, any success I had was down to my communication with my venue, and things I did in March came back to help me in August because my venue knew they would communicate with me. If they got an opportunity, they sent it to someone that they knew would get back to them. And also you start to meet the other shows in your venues, so suddenly you can start sharing spaces, sharing ideas.
And by thinking about it early and reaching out and seeing if it's something the venue is able to do, you're showing your interest, you're showing your passion for this area. So the amount of support they're able to give, if there is a finite amount, if there's a finite time with captioning units or additional funding, by showing your interest now and showing you're keen to get involved, will always put you in a good place.
Of course, it is worth remembering that for some of these, actually, you may have to spend maybe nothing at all. Relaxed performances, for instance, you mean the main expenditure again will be your time, and that would apply to caption if you went down the DIY route as well. You'd look at maybe a one-off payment, and then that would be set for every performance you do this year and next.
And with all of these, it's you can't. So it's so hard to convey the difference this can make. I mean, Alan
absolutely.
tells stories of when you see, particularly when it comes to children's shows that have relaxed performances, for parents to come out and we've heard stories. This is the first time I've been able to take my child to a theatre show or anything, and it's transformative.
So I used to work in the access bookings department of the Edinburgh Playhouse, which is a year-round venue in Edinburgh. as it says in the tin, and we did a autism-friendly, we called it, performance of the first national tour of The Lion King, and like I thought it was a cool thing. Like I thought it was like, this is a nice thing that we're doing. Working that performance on the day, like I think most of our team had like a little bit of an emotional moment at some point of like families being like, we didn't think we'd ever be able to have a day out like this. Like genuinely seeing that made me realize that with a small amount of adaptation, you can actually massively change someone's ability to access art, really.
Definitely. And I guess it's good to think about the fact you're at the Fringe. It's a good time to try things out that you're going to take on with you in future work. So it might be, you might give someone a great experience at the Fringe, but you might learn how to do something that then means you give more people fantastic times later on.
Yeah, and do you know what, we're talking about accessibility, but in its broadest possible sense, the whole talking to your venue and make sure you communicate properly, actually it helps all forms of like anyone access your show. Like if you talk to your venue so they know what's happening, there's clear lines of communication, people know what you're doing, they know if you've got deals on. It's just like that lines of communication are so important, which probably leads us quite nicely to the next sort of field that we're going to discuss around this, which was marketing.
And this is some of the ways we were actually using to describe today's episode, which was trying to help you get your show to as wide an audience as possible. Because without some of these adaptations, you're effectively excluding certain audiences from coming to see you. And at the Fringe, which is a huge global celebration of art with a very, very large number of people coming to see shows, but you are ultimately, there's a finite number of people. You want to open the doors to your show to as many people as possible. And that's where this marketing aspect comes in as well.
Yeah. And not to keep sort of harping on the same show really, but like exactly what Daniel said, My Left Right Foot, which we've talked about before, had such a huge level of integrated accessibility that actually it became something that really you heard about the show. Like it became a talking point around how great the show was.
I think it's worth remembering with accessible shows as well that deaf people have friends and family that aren't deaf. People that have a visual impairment have friends and family that don't have a visual impairment. Wheelchair users don't hang. I mean, they have lots of friends, I'm sure, that are wheelchair users, but they also have friends who aren't. So it's not just it's not that the adaptation is necessarily just for that one person, but they're able to come and see a show with their friends and family, which is what feedback that we've got from audiences who went to see adapted shows at the Fringe, is they really appreciate the fact that they can go and see something with their family.
Yeah.
And we'll cover this in later episodes of Fringe Cast, where we'll go into the detail of marketing your show. But it's just, I've gone into that and lost my train of thought.
I guess what I think is important is you don't want to just be, I want to do an adaptation, so just throw them in, but then not telling when you're doing them. Like it's like Lindsay was saying earlier, like talk to the communities you're trying to enable to see your show. You don't want to like spend your time, money making your show really accessible, but then have no one know that it's accessible.
What I was going to say.
Have I allowed you to look
You have.
back? Yeah.
It's about, you say, people have friends, and word of mouth to this day is still the most important method, most common method people have of discovering shows at the Fringe. Like Lindsay says,
Fact.
The whisper spreads, people hear about shows that way. It's the most important thing about marketing. In a general sense, what information do people need to be sharing about their accessible performances, and how do they integrate that with their overall communications, and how they build a buzz about their show?
Cool. So throwing it to Lindsay and Ray, what does the audience need to know? How can you make it available? What specifically to sort of enhance performances would you say that has to come across in the marketing?
So I would say, firstly, think about the formats that you're getting your information out there. Some of them you might not normally do. Some of them you probably would be doing for the Fringe. So one thing we would suggest is video trailers. If you're doing a show with British Sign Language in it, make a video trailer with British Sign Language in it. Really, so the audience can find out about this beforehand. Tell them things like what would be the character sign names, perhaps, a little bit of information about the synopsis, so you can pull them in. This doesn't have to cost anything again, really, either. You could do it on a mobile phone and get it on social media. If you do make a video, share it with us. We have the ability to share that from the Fringe website. on the listings page. We also have audio flyers, which again you can download free software for this. It would be exactly the same as the BSL clip, only it's an audio file. Think of putting information available on a Word document. This can be downloaded and then put through a screen reader.
And think about your usual marketing as well, posters and flyers, and if you can just put on there when your accessible performances, so that people, because again, people have friends and family who might want to go and see a show with them, might see that it's there and tell their friends about it. It's really worth just getting the message out about an accessible performance as early as possible and as much as possible. People who, deaf people with visual impairments, they have jobs and lives. They like to, be prepared and know what they're doing in advance. And just because there's a BSL interpreted show, for example, at the Fringe, doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go and see it. They might want to go to the football instead. So you're still competing with all the other things that you would be competing with for someone who doesn't have an impairment.
And we've spoken of word of mouth already and how important that is in the Fringe. So again, if you're thinking of doing an accessible performance, do it more than once, because that's how the word of mouth is going to spread.
And it's also more cost effective.
And it is also more cost effective.
A lot of the time, if you're working with a BSL interpreter or performer or a captioner, a lot of the cost, because you're working with very highly trained professionals, a lot of the cost is going to be in their preparation time and their things that happen before the performance, and the cost for the performance itself might be relatively low. If you're able to have more than one performance, then you're spreading that cost out a bit more, and you're also, as Ray said, you're kind of tapping into word of mouth. And that's definitely, we've spent the last few months talking to deaf people in particular, and that's something that they've all said, like they want more than one performance. I think another thing to add, especially with BSL performance, a lot of people want to know the name of the interpreter. So as soon as you know that, please tell us, because we'll include it on your online listing, but put it in your marketing material as well. They also want to know, where's the interpreter going to stand? Because at the Fringe, there's no reserved seating, so people want to know kind of whereabouts do they need to try and sit. You can talk to your venue about reserving seating for people that need the interpreter.
Or whether it's a performer rather than an interpreter as well.
And again, all those questions that we now ask in Ed Fringewear. So actually, if you're interested and you click yes when you're registering your show, we kind of now ask you all the questions that make you take a minute to go, what do I need to think about?
So if you've told us all that information, make sure you're telling your audience as well.
Yeah. Daniel, I was going to throw a question to you. You're in charge of the Fringe's social media channels, so we're trying to make ourselves more accessible. Like Lindsay spends our life trying to make us more accessible. Is there anything we do, like with our social media, to try and make ourselves accessible?
Yeah, and it varies a lot from the whatever social media platform you're using, because you're very much at the whim of how it works. But there are very simple adaptations you can make to the work or the content you're sharing to help make it more accessible. So one example is on Twitter. If you're posting through the Twitter app or twitter.com, if you upload a photograph, there's actually a little symbol that pops up that says alt, or just a text box. And all that's asking you to do is to describe what's in the image. Some people may use that just to credit the photographer, but what the use of that actually is, if someone's using a screen reader or has a visual impairment who can't see the image, you can use that field to describe what the image is. So for example, on the slide we have on screen now, we have a performer in a blue denim style shirt holding a black rectangular piece of cardboard with his face inside it to look like a television. You do kind of have to describe things quite literally, but it's invaluable just to explain what it is. Same if you're putting up a picture of a flyer. Describe what's in the flyer. If you're saying that your performance is at 7 p.m. every day and you've got accessible performances on Saturday the 12th and Sunday the 13th, describe that, because that's incredibly helpful. And then there's sort of one other thing you could do, which is not too time consuming. There are apps that you can use to help this, or YouTube can help with this, is if you're making a video, just caption it. Because that not only helps people who are unable to hear the sound of the video, but also in general...
That burdens for earlier in this session.
Like many people listening to this episode today. But also if someone's listening on a mobile device, you'll know yourself that you don't tend to listen to the sound of a video. So having that captioning there helps reach a broader audience across the board, whether they have a hearing impairment or not.
Yeah, think of all those times you're on Facebook on the bus and those videos start playing and I'm like, oh, I can engage with this because I'm watching the captioning.
So that's we've talked about putting that information in your show listing, and then I guess there's a question where that goes, and that kind of goes into the section of where we can help you and the role we play in signposting people to accessible performances and other support we can give.
Luckily, I had a slide all ready for that, Daniel.
That's very handy.
Lindsay, Ray, how can we help?
So we've recently updated our guidance about making shows accessible, as Ray mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the signed performances information will be up to date in the next couple of weeks, but we're still working on that.
Yes, so the information for captioned, audio described and relaxed is all there for the taking. Please look at it. I think Daniel will have put the link up for you.
Yeah, it's already. So the first link I think I shared in the
brilliant.
live chat.
And if you've got any questions, please just email us on the Equalities email address. We're more than happy to help, even me. It's not just Ray.
Yeah, apparently, I will get back to you on that.
What else can we do to help? We have some access equipment. I've spoken about this really briefly. We've got the captioning unit and the audio description unit, which we borrow and will be lending out. And we've also got some lovely backpacks, which Ray's going to tell you about.
Yes, we have the sensory backpacks, which we first brought out last year. These are for people who would find the Fringe to be a stressful environment on a sensory level. So perhaps autistic people, for example. They would have ear defenders, fidget spinners, stress balls. They come with a social story, which is a visual story to describe the Fringe environment to prepare people for it. And they were able to collect these from various locations. This year we're going to have them, more of the packs available from more locations, perhaps even in a venue, which you may or may not be performing at.
So if you see an audience member who's got what looks like headphones on, they might be ear defenders. If they see someone who's fidgeting with a fidget spinner or a stress toy, bear in mind that they might have those things to help them stay in your performance. And we've had audience members tell us that they feel concerned that performers might be a bit taken aback by this. So please just bear in mind that people, a lot of the time, people obviously want to be at your show because they're there, and if they've got ear defenders on, it's so that they can enjoy what you're doing.
One of the points there, Lindsay, is assisting audiences. We've actually added some new questions to Ed Fringewear. I feel like I should get points every time I mention Ed Fringewear. But actually, they're specifically so as we can help as well. So it's our wonderful access bookings team, which everyone should be aware of, can help audiences. So how is that going to happen?
So we've got a couple of new questions, which are about to make it easier for deaf people to find shows which don't need BSL interpretation. So it might be visual theatre, it might be mime, and also to help people with visual impairments to find shows which don't need any visual stimuli to help you make sense of what's happening. So it could be a concert, for example. And those are new for us for this year. We're really excited about them, and we're hoping that it'll open up the Fringe for people.
And they stand apart from any kind of adaptation that you're doing. So it's just how accessible your show, without any adaptation, without any of the things we've been talking about so far, how accessible is the show to those audiences?
And we use all this information to help signpost people in the right direction to find shows that suit them. So like the guys have been saying, we do have the access booking service, which you may find useful. You may know someone who could find that useful, where we have a dedicated team on hand right now when office hours are open to support people booking their tickets. But in addition to that, if you're just browsing what's on at the Fringe, on the website or on the Fringe app or in the printed programme, that information provided at registration is invaluable to helping people identify performances that suit their access requirements.
Something, and I hope the access team don't refute me on this one, but something I heard that has really stuck with me about, like, kind of when you're answering questions about your show's accessibility, is I think I was once nervous about, like, I just need to make it sound as accessible as possible because I don't want to put anyone off from coming. But actually, there's a lot of audiences that need that information and just want to know, yes, or they just want to know as a fact, how accessible is this? And it's actually a lot worse to kind of fudge things a little bit in order to make someone feel more comfortable, because then they can't access the performance?
I've just had a quick glance at the clock, and time is marching on, so I fear we'll have to move on from this. But just to reiterate on that marketing side, because I am very biased, this is support we provide to you on your journey all the way to the Fringe. And if you have specific marketing advice queries, we have an email address very handily named marketingadvice@edfringe.com, which I'll pop into the live chat, which Alan can say a little bit more about while I'm typing.
That was really close, Daniel, but it's media advice.
Oh, sorry. At least that wasn't captioned. Oh,
Yeah. Although it very much probably should be called marketing advice, because it is about, basically, we've got a team that are there to help you with any aspect of promoting your show. And promoting your accessible performances is very much a part of that. We can be there as a sounding board, whether it's helping you do your press release, or sometimes actually just getting to the crutch of, the crux of, not the crutch of, what we get to is what is the fundamental sort of unique selling point of your show, and helping you stand back from the creative process and go, okay, what is exciting about my show? And Daniel will now have popped that in the chat.
And spelt it correctly. So we've covered some of the ways we're here to help you, but who else can people reach out to get support? I know Lindsay's already mentioned local community groups and large organisations, but who else can people talk to?
So Solar Bear, Birds of Paradise, Grey Eye, those are all the people that we turn to for help. They're very worthwhile looking at their websites for sure. It's worth also having a look at Unlimited, the organisation Ray mentioned, who are there to work with deaf and disabled artists and help them get shows on and get their work made.
A really common piece of advice we give in these Fringe casts, I think Alan's looking at me because he knows I've stolen what he's
stolen. I was totally
about
prepared
to say, is to not only look at the shows that are registered in this year's Fringe, but head to the website and look at last year's programme, because you can get a feel for some of the shows that have made adaptations and just get in touch with them. You know, Fringe performers are a very open bunch, and if you just ask them questions like, how did you do this? You can contact them on social, or whatever it means. They'll be happy to, I'm sure, have a cup of coffee or a Skype.
On that, actually, Daniel, if you go again to the Access Guide information, one of the things we've started to do now is put up case studies by companies who have made their performances accessible. So keep your eyes on those as well, because they are always quite interesting to see how they've did it, why they did it, and what they got out of it on a personal and creative level.
And you know what? We're not being flippant there. I think that's actually a really important point, because, like, I've done shows before, and I think I was guilty at the time of just not knowing enough at the start. So just being like, oh, well, that's something for more professional companies or companies further down the line. And I think that first step of actually figuring out the process and seeing actually how simple it can be at times is a really important step to actually going, okay, even if I'm just doing one thing to make my show more accessible this year, I'm on that path going forward.
So we're very near the end of our hour. So before we wrap up, I've just popped in the live chat. It'd be great to know if you do have any other questions for us before we wrap up. Do just pop them in the live chat. But we've got a few things to cover before we go away. We have these top tips. Which would you like to take on first?
I suppose we'll go for the top one, which, yes, absolutely, you need to engage with deaf and disabled people as artists or audience members when creating your show. This could be by casting people in the roles, or at the very least, if you are putting on an accessible performance, you need to engage with them to get feedback before the Fringe begins. There's no point you thinking you've made your show accessible and then getting a backlash from the audience because you've not spoken to anybody and you found out it actually isn't.
Make sure that you let everyone know what you're doing as early as possible. Deaf and disabled people have the same busy lives that everybody else have, and the same competing things on their time. And so getting that information out about what you're doing and how you're doing it as soon as possible is really important. Please tell us as soon as you know what you're doing, because we want to make sure we can pass that information on.
As we've mentioned, I think numerous times now, talk to your venue. Keep them involved from the very beginning. As we've said before, they may have experience of doing this already, or you need to work out whether maybe it's not practical in the venue you want to perform in.
I've got a question I'm going to throw in, because it's just taking the idea of accessibility just from a a point of view that we haven't discussed a bit yet, and that's the point of view of a disabled artist wanting to make work. So we had a question, and I'm gonna read it pretty much word for word because I think it's an example of very good practice. So the person asking, they're a performer/producer with disabilities, and they're planning a reconnaissance visit to the Fringe in 2019 with the hope of staging an event in 2020. What's great about that, Lindsay?
So many things. Such a good idea to come in advance because you can scope out the venues. You can find out if you've got access requirements. You can find out without the stress of actually putting your show on. You can find out what the venues look like during the Fringe. It's worth maybe on our venue search tool, you can search for venues that have access to the stage, level access to the stage. It's maybe worth having a wee look at venues that are engaging in our Venue Access Award. You can find out more information about the Venue Access Award on the Ed Fringe website. But venues that are at level 2 of that award we can guarantee provide level access to their stage and backstage areas. But also just get in touch with us, get in touch on that Equalities email address or with our Access Bookings team. Our Access Bookings team are amazing. They go above and beyond. They will give as much information and assistance as they can. We list, obviously this person hasn't specified what their requirements are, but we list on our website, on our, if you go to the tickets website, we list venue access and at a space level, so you can find quite detailed what the access is for an audience member, and as I said before, you can use a venue search to find out what the access is like for a performer as well.
And I've just popped that in the live chat as well.
Amazing, thank you for that. What I would say, and this is something that I'm very passionate about, whether you have a disability or any kind of obstacle in you coming to the Fringe as an artist, please talk to us. Like, it's literally why we're here. To support artists is one of our key fundamental aims at the Fringe Society. And it can be so frustrating when someone comes for help and it's just like really last minute. And we're like, if you'd engaged with us, we can absolutely help you. So it's that thing of you don't know, maybe there's a way that we can help that's really easy. So actually, even if you've got a question that you think is quite small or you think is quite sort of random, if you email us on equalities@edfringe.com, we've also got participants@edfringe.com, which is another really good sort of entry point to the Fringe Society. There is normally, I like to think we can normally answer that question or get you the place that can answer that question. So absolutely keep in touch with. I've changed the slide there just with some emails and some handles.
And particularly getting in touch, because we often say with Fringe casts, you don't necessarily know what you don't know. Yeah. So asking us one question may open up a second or a third. It may identify challenges you weren't aware of, or indeed there could have been opportunities or things you could do quite easily. Yeah. So if you come to us to talk about signed performances, but actually there's an opportunity to bring in a caption performance, that's great, but we wouldn't be able to have that conversation unless you get in touch and ask us more information about one.
Classic example, last year we had a blind artist get in touch with us last year in the program team, and they were just saying they didn't have a clue how to tackle registration with a visual impairment, and actually it allowed us to like look at our practice and how best to help them. And actually, her name was Claire, actually, much like our captioner today. And it was a really great process of actually being able to help someone through, and we were able to learn from that, and then we were able to make the registration process, which would have been quite daunting and quite overwhelming, just every day.
So we've got literally 2 minutes to go. This is our final call out for any questions through the live chat. But while you're having a think, if Alan just jumps ahead to the next slide, we have some more Fringe casts coming up. We actually have one this Thursday called Kickstart Your Fundraising, which is exploring some of the different ways you can fundraise and crowdfund your Fringe, and that's in partnership with crowdfunding experts Kickstarter. So you can register for that on our website. I'll put the link in. Do you want to talk about the next one, Alan, so I can then put the link in?
Yeah, so the others, the others are much more, we're zoning in the date at the moment, so coming up, we're going to be having a discussion on parenting in the performing arts, where we talk about sort of the challenges and things you need to plan for of being a parent in something that's as sort of high pace and high energy as the Fringe. We've talked a lot about marketing and social media. Those get their own sessions coming up. They sort of tend to start from May when we really want to, or end of April when we really want to focus on how you can make the most out of your Fringe. And then something that we feel really passionate about this year in Fringe Central, which is our participants hub, and hopefully your home away from home if you're an artist at the Fringe, is your mental health and well-being. The Fringe is one of the funnest, most you can get such an amazing experience, potentially life-changing performing at the Fringe. However, it can also be incredibly exhausting and incredibly overwhelming. And in that's going to be 1 month before the Fringe kicks off, so on the 2nd of July. And it's actually going to be, we don't want to make it sound doom and gloom, but it's actually about how you get yourself ready so as you can access the Fringe in the best possible way and make the most of your time there.
So that's what's coming up. Also today, we'd like to know how today was. We're going to send out a feedback survey tomorrow, and that also gives you an opportunity to send us any questions, further questions you may have, and you can just drop in your email address and we can get back to you. And you can let us know how it was, even the glorious 10 minutes of silence at the start.
Maybe you enjoyed that.
Maybe you enjoyed it. Maybe it was relaxing until you heard our voices. So that's we'd love to hear what you thought. Indeed, tell us how quiet it was, or just anything else that you'd like us to cover in future Fringe casts, or just anything we could do to change them, to maybe make them more accessible or just easier to take part in.
What's exciting is they're a fairly new thing for the Fringe. We're barely a year old in terms of Fringe casting, so actually we're still malleable. We're eager to learn how to get you the information you need. And actually, if there's something you'd really want covered, absolutely let us know, because that could shape future sessions.
So that's about it. I don't have any more outstanding questions. So I guess it just leaves us to say thank you so much for listening in. Do get in touch if this has opened up more questions down the line, or maybe you're listening back to the session at a later date or looking at some of the links. You can get in touch with us with information on screen. Any final words of wisdom from the room? I hadn't warned them I was going to ask them that. Your top tip.
So I've just noticed a note that Ray did earlier where he's written, remember, it can be done cheaply. It's the Fringe. It doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be there.
Just like how sound was.
And Lindsay has stolen my top tip. I would say, announce early, perform this more than once. Remember, word of mouth, and talk to your venues.
Well, I think that's us for the day. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Ray and Lindsay for coming as first-time Fringecasters and letting us into the world of accessibility, and also a massive shout-out to Claire. We literally couldn't have done it without you today.
I think what she does is, I can only describe it as magic.
If you watch it, it's pretty incredible.
So I think after that marathon hour of captioning, we will let Claire and everyone in the room just sit down, have a breath. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to say goodbye, as long as everyone else in the room. I'm not going to turn on the webcam because it makes it a lot easier. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you. Stay
Thank you.
fringy.
Bye.